Hey all, your OS reviews. In this video, we're taking a quick look at the Dopesplay DR1461. This is a 14-inch lapdock, an accessory designed for smartphones that have video display output functionality using Type-C, allows you to activate Dex mode when a monitor is connected, turning it into a pseudo laptop experience with a keyboard and trackpad that is functional as well. Building off the concept of continuity, since our smartphones have become progressively more powerful as the generations go by in terms of processor, so if you're just trying to use it like a Chromebook alternative for just lightweight web browsing, then something like this can actually be a pretty interesting option to consider. So the lapdock itself is basically just a screen with a battery and keyboard. There are no other internals in terms of CPU or operating system of its own. It's a shell that remains compatible also if you're upgrading your phone, as long as it supports video output in the future. And like other portable monitors, you're able to connect it to gaming consoles, even use it as a second screen if you're linking it to a Windows machine or a MacBook. Now, this concept isn't completely new. Back in 2011, it's actually quite nostalgic. Over a decade ago, Motorola came out with a very early version of a lapdock compatible with their Atrix series of smartphones that played on the same idea, with a desktop-class browser that's different from the mobile version that you would normally access. The issue, though, is Motorola's concept was essentially only compatible with the limited devices that they crafted, and you could dock it onto the side something like this, but because of the orientation of the port, it's not really a universal dock, since most phones don't have the exact same placement on the edge, which is where a more generic version like this modern dope display might be more universal, even though the idea we have seen in generations past. That being said, I still kind of like how Motorola designed the original lapdocks here to have the phone at least sit on the back of the device when you're doing some work, compared to on these modern versions, there's really no place to hold the phone, so it still has to sit on the desk on the side. Granted, you could always pick up other accessories like this one here from Rolling Square. It's a company based in Switzerland that we checked out a while back, which essentially sticks on using 3M stickies, and then you can mount your phone using magnets onto the back with a magnetic sticker, case, or a MagSafe device like on an iPhone. It's actually pretty handy. You can then collapse down again. There are, of course, other types of generic stands that you can find for laptops that are stick-on as well, but you have to add that yourself instead of being built directly into the first-party design. Now, this model in particular is actually a more entry-level version from Dope Display. We have seen one of their slightly more premium models in the past that has a touchscreen, a slightly higher resolution, and some of their models even come with wireless docking functionality. There's built-in Wi-Fi, and you can use Miracast or Chromecast to wirelessly send the phone screen over to the dock without connecting the Type-C cable. However, that does introduce a bit more latency, so it might not be as smooth feeling. This one, by contrast, is really more bare bones, and it can be found in the $200 range, often with coupons available, so keep an eye out for that. That price seems fair, although arguably you can also find some entry-level laptops running on an Intel Celeron chip with Windows built in for roughly the same price range, but those of course don't have the ability to connect external devices. So from a component level, you're always going to be paying a little bit more for laptops just because there's not as many companies producing them versus regular laptops. But not bad, I would say. The screen here offers relatively slim bezels and it's a full 1080p resolution, 60Hz refresh rate. Would have been better to see something like 90 or slightly faster if you did want to do some gaming. Again, it's more of an entry-level model. Something that is a little bit funny though is on the very top there is a placement for a webcam and even a privacy shutter that can cover up the camera, except on this model there is no camera. It's really just a dummy housing. So I suspect the factory, when producing these, just used the shell from an actual Windows computer, reusing some of those components to build this model, but it's a little bit funny there. Otherwise, down below we'll find access to the chiclet island style keyboard. Now again, since this model is more of a basic version, the keys are not backlit, unlike some of their more premium pro models that comes with that capability, though you may have to pay around $100 more. So on here, you just get some quick shortcut commands. If you tap on function for adjusting properties like the screen brightness, this is 100%. Overall, I would say it's visible if you're mostly indoors. It's a matte screen, so at least it doesn't have as much reflections as a glossy panel since it isn't a touch screen. And viewing angles aren't bad as an IPS LCD screen, rated at around 178 degrees. However, if you're outdoors in direct sunlight, it's not going to be the brightest panel in the world. Now, the hinge here does fold completely flat, so if you are accidentally pushing it against a table or a child knocks it over, it's not going to snap or break as easily, but this is as far back as it goes. It doesn't really have a tent mode that can further flip back into a stand where you're only seeing the screen. Further down below here, you'll find the touchpad, which works decently, left and right click commands, and surprisingly not that shabby in terms of responsiveness, though it is a plastic trackpad instead of being crafted out of glass. And same thing goes with the deck here, it's crafted out of plastic as well, feeling decent. Although if you're in the middle of the keyboard and you're pressing really firmly, there is a little bit of flexing, which is noticeable. But all in all, I would say it's an acceptable level of fit and finish. Maybe the favorite thing I have about this particular design is the fact that it is quite compact in terms of the chassis and frame, so it does feel like an ultra portable when you're traveling with it. And on the side here we have all of the I/O, inclusive of the Type-C port here, which is designed for video, as well as again supporting the keyboard and touchpad. Now in terms of the barrel plug here, this is used for charging up the 5000 milliamp hour capacity battery, and it does require you to use that barrel plug for charging instead of using USB Type-C, which would have been nice to have as maybe a backup way of charging, but you do have to use this included charging adapter. It does come with some other prongs though. If you are traveling, going to other countries, you can find other styles of tips which are thrown in the box, along with the Type-C cable, and also a bundled HDMI cable are included as well. Keep in mind though, if you're using the HDMI port, for example connecting it to a gaming console or another existing laptop or computer, it's going to work in the display mode, but the keyboard and mouse might not be functional. If you want to access the keyboard, you have to use the Type-C port. You'll also find a full USB Type-A port, as well as on the other side, 2 more Type-A ports. So this is actually a little bit better than some of the other lapdocs we've seen in the past, giving you a bit more I/O if you want to connect thumb drives or reading back files, transferring them between a phone onto another memory card, and you can even see a micro SD card slot here as well, plus a standard 3.5mm headphone jack. In addition, this thing does have built-in stereo speakers of its own if you want to play out sound, located on the back of the device, as you can see here. I tend to prefer if the speakers are on the inside just to prevent them from getting covered up, but it's better than nothing, and if you are connecting it to something like a mini PC that might be lacking a built-in speaker of its own, at least you're able to now listen to sound or watch movies with those built-in speakers. By the way, the battery is rated to last around 6 hours of continuous use, and when you are connecting it to a phone by Type-C, it's also charging the phone at the same time. So it's also acting as a power bank as well. It's not bad, although it would be even better if the number was closer to 8 or 10 hours, but sufficient for a lighter workday, I would say. And also it charges back up in around 2.5 hours from 0 to 100%. A quick glance here at the user manual, we get a more complete list of types of devices which are supported. Again, if your phone has Type-C video output support, it will work, including S-series Galaxy phones, Note series, as well as Huawei's kind of P-series and Mate series of phones will launch into Harmony OS. Even some of the Xperia 1, Xperia 5 phones are all examples that you'll see. Now, on some of the earlier generations of Google Pixel phones, because the Type-C port is only designed for data transfer and charging, there is no video output support. Unfortunately, you won't be able to leverage it with this lapdock. However, in the latest Pixel phones, like the current Generation 10, at least Google have finally adapted the video display output mode, so you can now use it. And a couple more examples here for testing. We can see that this phone, again supporting Type-C video output, has also launched into a desktop mode. Some of the flagship grade LG phones, before they quit the space, also supports desktop mode as well. Although my understanding is for Motorola, it might be a little bit more hit or miss. For example, some of their Razer foldable series phones has a wireless desktop display mode, but not via Type-C. But if the hardware is there, you can see it's basically just a plug and play experience, working without too many problems. Let's also go through some quick function controls. So again, tapping on the battery icon here, we can gauge the battery percentage left in the dock. So right now around 91%, for example, as well as some more advanced controls for things like contrast of the screen. Aspect ratio, which is adjusted automatically, can also be manually changed. And for color, you can also change the gamma, color, temperature. Case in point, we can cycle through. This is going to be a slightly more bluish color temperature, slightly colder, versus getting a little bit warmer, as you can tell there. So you can play around with some of those controls based on your preferences, and there's even a user set adjustment here as well for RG and B values that you can assign. Another option here for preset color options can also be found. So for example, the default versus a gaming mode actually has a slightly more moody appearance compared to a movie mode, slightly more cinematic. Photo, as well as a vivid mode that slightly boosts the contrast level, and then also another user assigned profile that you can save onto the device. In addition to another setting here for hue, so you can kind of change it to skew the color and be a little bit more stronger in terms of color intent. Saturation might be a little bit too overblown here versus dialing it back. as you can see here, also making it colder as well manually. So it's actually pretty adjustable, not bad at all in terms of the screen quality for what it is. It's not too surprising considering that this brand is known for making portable monitors previously as well. Just a couple more options here for aspect ratio can also be played around with. For example, this one here is a 4:3, as well as manually rotating the screen can also be done. So for example, we can flip it 90 degrees versus 120 degrees or 180 degrees after a couple of seconds before it will then initiate. So those are the basic display properties that we're able to adjust using the controls on the top. Otherwise, you can activate some quick shortcut commands like the home key, for example, jumping into the full list of apps, usually toggling back and forth on compatible desktop modes. Also glad to report that the trackpad supports multi-touch gestures as well for scrolling, as well as pinch to zoom, as you can see there, for getting a little bit closer to some of the objects, as well as when you're scrolling up and down through lists. So generally speaking, it's not bad as far as just using it for quickly navigating around. Feels pretty similar to an entry-level Chromebook or a Windows computer in terms of the general experience. And performance in terms of operation speed is kind of self-selecting in a way, because if you think about it, many of the higher end phones or flagships tend to have USB Type-C output support, like the Galaxy S series phones. And since it already has a slightly faster processor, it's not that surprising that the overall performance when you're navigating around feels pretty responsive for the most part. And also the Hinge has an auto on and off sensor, as you can tell here. As we're closing it up, it knows to turn off the display to consume less power when you're traveling. When you flip it open again, it just resumes on the last spot that it was on. You can turn the entire thing on and off, by the way, by tapping on the power key for a few extra seconds if you want to completely turn off the battery. And now for a throwback, this is going to be quite nostalgic. We have a Windows phone that also supports Type-C and Continuum. So you're also able to access a desktop mode after a couple of seconds, booting into a kind of Windows 10 inspired UI. Again, kind of sad that Microsoft is just no longer making any smartphones or mobile devices at all, especially since their last hurrah being the Surface Duo. Transitioning to Android also just never really took off, sadly. But this was also kind of ahead of its time, giving you the ability to also do a bit more multitasking more comfortably while the phone's display can also be turned off, and again, remaining compatible for devices that have that Type-C capability, as you can see here. As alluded to earlier, overall I think the keyboard is comfortable enough without requiring too much acclimation to get used to when it comes to general typing. Having decent travel and feedback to the keys, they're not too shallow and actually pretty easy just to type on for some quick emails, documents, Google Docs, things like that. And we're able to jump into full screen view here as well to give you a more cinematic experience when consuming media, streaming some YouTube videos, Netflix shows. Of course, it's going to feel just a bit more enjoyable compared to a phone screen here at the end of the day. It's another nice application for entertainment purposes. Actually looking quite good, as you can tell here when it comes to colors, as well as general viewing angles. Now, in terms of the loudspeaker, I would say it's decent. At least it doesn't sound too tinny or distorted. However, it doesn't pack as much volume output, doesn't get quite as loud as I would have loved. But overall, it certainly is functional, giving you a bit more separation compared to on a phone because of the wider dimensions of the Lapdock. And if you're wondering, for modern iOS devices, including iPads and iPhones with USB Type-C, those will also be supported. So as you can tell here after a moment, it will then pop up on here. Of course, it's a bit more of a square aspect ratio, mirroring what the device is seeing, with the accelerometer here also functioning. Similarly, the trackpad is also going to be functional once again, in addition to the keyboard here being functional as well for typing. So it can be another alternative to some of the maybe keyboard folio cases if you're okay with, again, the iPad itself having to still sit on the side of the desk. So there we have it. That's been more or less it as far as our hands-on review of the Dopesplay DR1461, kind of a generic name there, but overall it's not shabby for just an entry-level basic laptop. Again, if you're curious about experimenting with this form factor, if you do have a compatible flagship phone that supports Type-C video output, then this can actually be an interesting alternative to an entry-level Windows or Chrome OS device, since you already have all the apps as well as media files and your account data on your phone or tablet set up already. You don't have to transfer it back and forth. Setting up another device can actually save you a little bit more time, especially with the desktop mode support getting progressively better through incremental updates, whether it's from Samsung or Google themselves, finally with Android now supporting more and more of a native desktop mode. And the hardware hardware itself is also not bad in terms of being very compact and easy to travel with. So just keep in mind that it's rather no frills in terms of not having a touchscreen, doesn't really have a tint mode for a 360 hinge, but if you're okay with those omissions, I would say this is not a bad choice. You can check out more details if you're interested in something like this in the links down below, as well as our coverage on past Lapdocks as well. For now, that's been our video. Thanks for watching here at OS Reviews. That has been, again, the Dopesplay DR1461.